Polly and Me, a disturbing, as I said, fictional portrayal of a life that too many of our kids are living out in the real world. But as we'll discover this evening from our guests, there are definitely ways out for that child, though maybe not enough of them. I'll introduce you to guests who've lived versions of her story and to others working every day with families in similar situations, trying to prevent things getting that bad. And the main question, really, we'd like to pose tonight is this: how can we, as a whole community, help that little girl live a good life? And first, I'd like to start with the filmmaker, Ian Darling. Ian, why did you decide to make a film quite like that?
Well, Geraldine, I think it was when we were making the Oasis documentary about youth homelessness that we came across what we thought was a very serious problem, that so much of the damage that was happening to these kids was happening in the first 10 years of their lives, when they were behind closed doors and out of the eyes of the authority and authorities and so much of the community. And it was over hundreds of conversations that we had with these kids where we realised that so many of them had come from homes where there was extreme domestic violence. So many of them had suffered abuse and neglect. In so many instances there was alcohol and substance abuse that you couldn't even dream of. And many of the kids had come from families where their parents and grandparents had suffered the same levels of abuse and neglect.
I mean, you obviously came in as a pretty privileged person. I just wonder, well, is it a long way from where you lived? How do you bridge the gap? I mean, what did it do to you as a member of the community who obviously was a long way from experiencing
I think it opened my eyes to the fact that it's happening in every community. It's not happening in someone else's community, it's happening in our street, it's happening in your street. And the reason we wanted to make a real film is to actually help us as a community ask those questions about what can we do and actually say, no, it's not too difficult. We've really got to face up to it now and do something to help.
Sue Packer, you actually work with kids at risk. You're a doctor who would see a child like that. Now, how typical is that pretty grim old story?
It's unfortunately very typical. Not many of the mothers die, but in many ways thinking of her life continuing, even as it was, is quite shattering and horrible. And it is certainly very, very typical, and I've seen it year in, year out for the last 20 years.
I mean, I hope that's at the bad end of the spectrum, is it?
It's at the worst end of the spectrum, yes.
Right, OK. And have you seen any improvement in that time? I mean, we're going to explore that tonight,
yes.
But
I think
be honest.
We don't really know as much about this even as we should. It depends which children are sent to see you. And there are some variations in the patterns of drug use, but still drug use and alcohol use.
Drug and alcohol.
And domestic violence are the biggest three.
Could I come to a couple of our special guests tonight? People have been very brave. B, you had a mother who had certainly an alcohol problem. I think you've eaten out of cans yourself as a child. You've been through a lot, B. Thank you very much for being here tonight. How did you relate to that little girl?
Well, I'd say that my story is quite similar to Polly and me. Besides the obvious sort of scenes that you could see of abuse, there's definitely the little things that struck me, such as, you know, the scene with the can. It's not so much that within itself, but those bits of struggle that sort of come with having a mother that's not so capable of looking after you. So. And
when do you think you came to realise that she wasn't capable of being the type of mother that you imagined?
Not until I was much older. Perhaps when I was a teenager and we started to fight a lot. When I was younger, I just didn't quite understand why she slept all the time, why she wasn't there to play with me and stuff. So it wasn't so much, I didn't know any better. So you don't really think much of it until you get older and you start to compare yourself, and then the alarm bells start to, go off in your head.
Could I ask Asher? Asher's also with us. Thanks, Asher. That's because your mother, I think, was a sex worker, and you had a well, you in fact lived with your grandparents, didn't you, until you were about 12, I think. Did you relate to that girl?
Yeah, on heaps of different occasions. Just the two that really hit home with me is the promises, all the broken promises that I'll be back, that we won't be long, we'll go to the park or something like that, even though it wasn't to that point of it. I wasn't so young, that the promises were made and always broken. And the way the girl, even for the split second that Ian showed it, where she was standing in front of the mirror putting her mother's lipstick on, trying to find that way to connect. You know what I mean? Like, I found that way to connect through drugs and alcohol and all that sort of stuff with my mother, you know what I mean? But just seeing that really does hit home.
And why do you think it's important for people to see that level of misery? Why does it matter?
Because, in all honesty, how can you fix a problem that you can't see?
So people wouldn't have seen you in this predicament?
No.
Really? So you want it out and discussed, and people, for a lot of wider Australians, to understand what some kids go through?
Yes, I do. Well, like on the main fact that through the communities getting in touch with like the drinking and driving and smoking and all that sort of stuff, if the communities got involved that much with these child issues and child abuse and all that sort of stuff, we would have a...
Fixed, or go close on fixed. Maybe I could come to Leah Bromfield, who actually works with, you know, a very sort of top researcher in this field. I mean, Leah, how realistic is that story?
Tragically, I think that the story is true for many of Australia's children today. It's quite a typical
And
case.
what patterns, would we see it? That's the thing. A lot of people would be sitting back and say, well, that's just got nothing to do with my street or my suburb. Now, is that a fair comment?
No, I don't think that's a fair
So
comment
how
at
would we
all.
know that there could be that happening under the surface?
I guess what we need to do as a community is, as Asha was saying, to be aware, to think about child abuse and neglect, to be willing to go there, to notice children and to notice families. I think for this family, there were people who would have been coming in contact with this family.
Quite. Why wouldn't someone have noticed that child?
I would like people to notice that child. I think we're not used to asking. I think we've got to think very differently as a community. We have a child protection system that's all designed around waiting until after abuse and neglect has happened, and then we make a report. What we need to do is broaden it out, make protecting children everyone's responsibility.
But, you know, you could be accused, if you suspected something, of interfering. What's the Balancing Act?